So I'm a little tethered here, which is I'm used to moving around a little bit, so you might see us on the floor for the second half of the more interactive part of the workshop. But for some of you who have been part of CNS or the Canadian Nutrition Society, you may have seen some of these workshops in different forms before. So I'd consider this kind of a lightning version of those. We're really going to do a high-level overview of what infographics are. Some of you are probably quite familiar, others maybe less so. And then we're going to, for those of you who were able to bring your device with you, we're going to really get started quickly so you can get a feel for what this software looks like and kickstart your own infographics. So we have two volunteers with us from the Canadian Nutrition Society that will be circulating with a microphone. So please grab them, ask them questions. If you're stuck on something with the software, Flora, who is at that table there, Dr. Flora Wang, will be happy to help you, and so would I. So flag us down as we go through things. And quickly, some of you who may have seen Flora and I already at the conference, we're both part of the Canadian Sugar Institute, and this is something that, again, some people have heard of and some people haven't. So we're a national nonprofit organization that works on both international sugars trade and nutrition. So what Flora and I do is on the nutrition side of things. So we work to communicate nutritional science about sugars, carbohydrates, and health using the scientific evidence that's been published by research groups, by high-quality systematic reviews. We learned that there's lots of different quality evidence out there, so we try and take the best available and the most current evidence. What we also do is work on resources. So we want to support dietitians and healthcare professionals in the field. We know we can't reach everyone in the public, so we want to get the facts and the stats to those people who are communicating with the public. So that's one reason why in my role I have an ability to talk about knowledge translation tools, because that's a big part of what we do, is take the science and give it to the people who really need that information. Okay, so what are infographics? A lot of you may be familiar with seeing them before, and so they're a quick way to convey knowledge or content to an intended target audience. And so they can be used for decision making or comparison. That could be in a business setting or in when you're trying to decide between two different products. It's a quick way to communicate that information. And they can serve as a role of bridging the gap. So we had a great conversation yesterday with a dietitian that said, you know what would be really great if I had something I could walk through with my clients and really talk to them, and then they could leave with that. And we thought, we have a few things that could work for you. So it's a way to have a conversation about a shared topic and in a visual way for your intended audience. So the history of infographics, we may think that we're trendy and new and cool. It's been around for a long time. So if we think about the art that was a long time ago used to communicate stories and language and culture, that's been going on for quite a long time. So infographics aren't new. Maybe the term is just new to us. So this date was also quite important. In 1982, USA Today had the first colored graphic to share their information. So we're used to black and white newspapers. This really revolutionized the way that newspapers were sharing their information. And now I don't think we see any media stories without an accompanying photo or image or graph. So really interesting how this has changed the way that we absorb information. And brings us to the present day. So we have lots of examples that we're going to share with you that show us just how prevalent infographics are in our society. So a little bit of science. Again, as a scientist, we try and root, no matter what projects we're doing, in the literature. What have we seen before? So for people that have participated in creating an infographic before, there was a study that evaluated them as well as the facilitator in the course. So they found that creating an infographic helped people see the big picture of the topic that they're working on. They also rated it to be fun, so that's a perk. If you're getting ready to start an infographic, some people enjoyed the process, so that's a good thing to keep in mind. And then from the feedbacker side, they felt like the participants really benefited from sketching it out ahead of time. So you might want to jump right in and get your ideas on the page, and if that's something you're comfortable with, great. But a lot of times to work out the flow of your ideas, putting it on pencil and paper is a good way to get started. And as a note of caution and from lived experience, turning it over in one day, impossible. If you figure out how to do it, please tell me, because it takes a long, long time and a lot of work to get to the final product. So acknowledge that with yourself and with your team, that it's going to take some time to get your product from start to finish. So just be mindful of that. Okay, so some of you may be familiar with these. We wanted to share some examples. So if you're thinking to yourself, has anyone come across these in a hospital, maybe on your campus? Does anyone, when you're seeing examples like this, can you picture seeing these in your day-to-day environment? Nods, shaking of your head. A few people say yes. So on this slide here, we have one from Health Canada, one from Abbott Food and Nutrition, and one from Public Health England. So there's all of these bodies of information that are translating their data to the public. So when I thought of these at first, you think of a waiting room. Sometimes if you're at the doctor's office, you're like, oh, there was an infographic there about flu, getting the flu shot, or there was something about washing your hands. In every single bathroom, you see a step-by-step of how to wash your hands, and you think, why did they have that here? But it's a quick way for everyone, no matter your reading level, to say, okay, you see the step-by-steps and why that's important. And then we also have a few others here. So we have an example of the portfolio diet, which was developed in Toronto and used for client-clinician communication. So again, going through with someone one-on-one and talking about elements of the diet in a one-to-one intimate setting, so you can show them what you're talking about visually. And on the other side here, we have Government of Canada communicating disease statistics. So when you're really trying to talk about prevalence and disease, one way to do that is infographic, and piktochart has a cool way to do this visually, which we'll talk about. Okay, so this might be something that you've thought about before. So we really want to design for first impression. So again, when you're in that waiting room, when you're reading a journal article, you got to capture people's attention right away. And if you can't do that, people aren't going to read your work. The same applies in some ways to our scientific posters that we see. Scientific posters are a form of infographics and visual communication. So I think it's important. There's sort of a standard way we do scientific posters, but we can think about that as we put our colors together, we include images, we make sure the information flows. We want to create a conversation. The more you can do that visually, the easier it is to talk to the people you're interacting with. Okay, so what we're going to do briefly is I'm going to put up 3 different infographics, and just in your head or on a piece of paper, you're only going to have a few seconds, but just rate on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being didn't really like and 5 being like when you see these infographics. So we'll put up the first one. So just really quick, kind of 1 being don't like, 5 being really like. We'll switch to the next one. And the last one. Okay. So is anyone willing to share we can have a microphone and people are willing to share. Was there something that caught your eye that you said, yes, that was an element that I liked? It could be anything about the graphic. Is anyone willing to share a positive that they enjoyed from the graphic? I see a few hands at the front.
I thought the first one that you showed was really nice and concise. Like it had a good amount of information, but it wasn't too overwhelming to look at or to read. Did you want just one, or I could continue on to the next one?
Go for it, yeah.
The second one, I thought it didn't have anything. I was just totally confused by it. And then the third one I just found was just too much of everything all at once. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. That's excellent. So the complexity and the type of information is really important. That's right away you're able to say too much, not enough. That was great. Anyone else have any other feedback you would want to share just as a first impression for seeing these infographics?
I think it depends on what you're looking for. So since my research is all about maternal nutrition, pregnancy, nutrition during pregnancy, to me the second one was, maternal pregnancy, whatever. So I just picked up on that right away. But the third one was too complex. Unless or until you sit there and look at all those images, trying to understand what is it trying to do. But the first and the second one were easy to get the message.
Absolutely, that's great. So it depends Who's your target audience? If you're designing your infographic for a researcher in maternal nutrition, great. The second one is really going to connect with them. You're going to see the sparks flying. If you're designing it for an audience that works in osteoporosis, are you going to connect with that second image? Maybe you're not. So those are really great feedback. And I think, again, you only had 5 seconds to look at it. And so there's been studies done that look at people's first impression of infographics. So in a study with over 1,000 people, they did a study where they showed them a random selection of 30 infographics, and then an unrelated task, and then those same infographics again. And so an example we have here at the bottom, one scored, the one on the right-hand, on the right-hand side, we have a score of 3, and the left-hand side, we had a score of 6.7. That's on a 9-point Likert scale. And they had 0.5 seconds to view these infographics, and that's how they rated them. And then their scores were consistent. When they saw the same image again, their likability within 0.5 seconds was almost rated the same. So you have 0.5 seconds to get someone to decide if they're going to engage in your infographic, which is super overwhelming and intimidating, is how can you get someone's attention in such a short time period? And so I think some elements that we see here were explained by those who shared their answers, which is great. So if we're thinking about variability in the responses, colorfulness and complexity explained 1/3 of the likability of the infographic. So we found that medium to high colorfulness scored best, and low to medium complexity scored best. So those elements are critical in the communication of your materials. And of course, the bottom, age, gender, education, those are all variables that differed people's opinions on the graphics. So knowing who you're communicating to is very, very important. So I just wanted to quickly show some infographics that we've developed at the Canadian Sugar Institute. And the main point is, what is the purpose of the infographic you're creating? If you can in one line tell me why you're doing it, that's excellent. So we have clearly identified one key message that we want to communicate in each of our work. So we have some examples on our table if you wanted to take a closer look, but we'll be using some of these examples just to highlight infographic elements, and that's why we're sharing them with you today. So on this one, for example, we wanted to communicate the functional roles of sugar. So that was the purpose, to communicate this message. And then the second one is sugar's labeling. So a lot of you nutrition know labeling is changing. So we wanted to help dietitians understand what the changes were and show them visually what they're going to look like. Okay, so something Shannon and I also wanted to share today was talking about how infographics are interdisciplinary. So knowing your scope is extremely important. So when I started infographicing, I was like, oh yeah, I can do all the things. I can design it, I can be the content expert, I can communicate. That was ambitious and maybe naive on my part to assume I can take all of the responsibility myself. So oftentimes as a nutrition expert, you might be working on the content. You are the content expert on your research or on the concept you might be communicating. And you can partner with someone who is an expert in communications that can help you develop the language to talk to your target audience. You can work with a graphic designer. When I've worked with graphic designers, you see your projects going from good to great, and you think, wow, I thought I had it nailed, but actually they have all of these other skills that I didn't know could be incorporated. So consider working with a team and really gaining the expertise from the wider group that you're going to be interacting with. Okay, so this, as I said, we'll go through really quickly, but as a scientist, I'm hoping this connects with some of you. I'm very process-oriented, so I like having a step-by-step process to go through when I'm doing anything from an experiment to creating an infographic. The thing to consider here is that on the right-hand side, you see revisions and an arrow going up and down, and this just means that this is an iterative process. So again, if you want to go from step 1 to 7 and be done, that may not happen. You may go from step 1 to 4 and then go back up to 1. You might go from 1 to 7 and then back up to 1 again. So just recognize that this process is going to continually evolve and that getting the feedback from other people will be essential in this process. Okay, do we have any questions at all before we go through this process quickly? Okay, great. Put up your hand at any time, happy to interact. Okay, so as I mentioned before, identifying the purpose. So it should be if you meet me in the hallway, see me in the elevator, and I say, hey, why are you creating an infographic? Make sure you can answer that question clearly, because that will really help you and the team you're working with come to a consensus on what information you want to include. Something that I thought was really great is deciding whether you're creating an infographic for education or for a call to action. So are you going to be sharing information, let's say, about FODMAPs, or do you want people to make a change? Do you want them to make a change to their diet? So think about that and what the purpose and how that relates to your purpose. And the other thing I hadn't considered before was, what do you want people to think, feel, and do as a result of seeing your infographic? So that's something that feels meta to me sometimes, but you really want to elicit a reaction, and if that's an action or if it's a knowledge, to consider that when you're developing your project. So some examples, what I'm going to do is show a lot of examples throughout so you see what I mean in practice. And so what we've done on this infographic at CSI is creating a key bolded statement to introduce your topic. So maybe that's a definition, maybe it's the start of your story. And then deciding what pictures you want to include can be really important. If I'm talking about sugars, I'm not going to put a picture of flowers because that's irrelevant. Even though it might be pretty, it's not connected to my story, so I really want to be intentional about the images that I choose. And sometimes mixing them in can be confusing for the reader. So if I'm using Google Images, I'm using piktochart, I'm using my own pictures, I'm using Shutterstock, choose a consistent look and feel that's really going to help your readers connect to your information. And then target audience. We've talked about this before. Who are you communicating to? Are you communicating to dietitians? Are you communicating to your clients? Are you talking to your colleagues? There can be a ton of different ways these are used, but identifying who you're talking to, as we mentioned before, that will help you identify what language, what colors, what graphics are going to be able to connect with your key groups. And so here's some examples here. I love these data and stats in a graphic form. I think it's really captivating. So the first example is from Health Canada, and it says 3 out of 5 Canadians eat too much sodium. So regardless of the content, we're looking at how they've communicated that. So really bold lettering in the numbers. And then they're visually showing you that 3 out of the 5 people to help you see what that might look like. Another thing I thought, living in Toronto, you see a lot of these transit ads, and instead of a whole page of text for you to read the message, they're showing you a huge visual. And so it says, once you see me, please share this space with me. So it's kind of like a Where's Waldo. You're saying, okay, who are they talking about in this infographic? And so in this example, it's a person who's using a wheelchair. But there's others, and you're playing almost a game visually to figure out what they're talking about, but they've already communicated their message by the time you read the bottom of it. So really, really a clever way to share their data. So just briefly on brainstorming and storytelling, it's an extremely important process for creating an infographic to tell a story. And this is something that Shannon helped me to learn from her perspective is, I think there was a quote from her or someone else that said, you're going to be leading the reader by their hand through your story. So whether that's someone with metabolic syndrome, whether that's someone in dietetics, help them understand the story. Is that creating an image that kind of acts as a character? Is it creating repetition in language? But think about it like a story. And so one way you can do that is by creating visually appealing elements that resonate quickly and easily with your audience. So instead of for us saying that fruits like grapes and carrots contain sucrose, fructose, and glucose, we can just show an image of those readily accessible fruits and vegetables and then include our key message underneath. And another element here, bold and easy to interpret language. So instead of, we know this picture looks like a child, we know this second picture might be an adolescent, so we're already almost digesting the information before we're reading the content. So this slide I think is really unique and something that we have to keep in mind. So all of you are experts in an area, let's say nutrition, or you've done a research project maybe in IBD or maternal nutrition, whatever it is. maybe some days you don't feel like an expert, and I know that's an overwhelming feeling when you're like, I still have 20 more papers to read till I really think I get it. But you know a lot more than a lot of people out there, so please keep that in mind. We think that we're doing a good job, but we're still way up here sometimes when we're trying to communicate our message. So some examples in psychology, they have people tapping a beat. So let's say the person beside you is tapping Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But the person to your right doesn't know what song you're tapping. And so you think like, I have nailed it this time. Like, I'm really doing a good job. Why aren't they getting what I'm doing? Or if you're humming, people have no idea what you're doing. And it's because you have the content knowledge and they don't. So they're not able to figure out what you're doing because they're lacking the context. So an example for directions, someone like me, I'm not good at directions. So in a new city, if you're saying, oh, how do I get to the restaurant that I'm looking for? Well, you're going to cross the street and go to the red house on the right, and then you're going to make a left, and you'll see the sign. I'm already, like, this looks like a car crash to me. And so for someone who knows the area, it's very obvious how to get there. So they're the content expert, and you're not. And the last one, I wish I could unsee this, and now I'm going to share it with you, and you can't unsee it either, is the fact that these characters, maybe mascots, or in this case, Sesame Street, there's a real person inside those costumes, which really freaked me out. And I know that you knew it was there, but now that you've seen it, when you see these characters again, you're not going to unsee this. So now you know too much, and this becomes, you're now the content expert. So these examples are just to show that when you're developing an infographic, you know more than your target audience. So remember to consider who you're talking to. And so I think this might be the hardest part. As a scientist and as researchers, we want to tell people everything. Do you remember in undergrad and first year when you were highlighting almost every line of the textbook? We can't tell everyone everything, so it's coming up with those key points, the start, the middle, and the end. What do you really want people to walk away with at the end of reading your work? So for us, for example, in this one, when we're talking about the functional aspects of sugars, we numbered them. So we're going to tell you about 5 functional roles today. Number 3, so that helps the reader know what to expect from you and gives you a way to organize your data. And we've also chosen images that directly reflect the text. So again, if we're talking about pickles, put a picture of a pickle. That's something that piktochart, the software that we use as an example, does so well. They have so many different images you can use. So be mindful to connect your text directly to the images. For content, we won't go through this too much, but you can communicate almost anything in an infographic. So don't feel like, does my data fit? Does my story fit? It probably does, and you can figure out a way to make it work. So in this case, we did a compare contrast. So I think this is really neat if you're thinking about a healthy versus a diseased state. I've seen some really great examples where they show you this visually. There's one, so we did this from a processing perspective, which some of you might do if you're in food science. What does product A look like compared to product B? And so we did this for the sugar manufacturing process between sugar cane and sugar beet. But there's an example, I think it might come in a minute, but think about let's say you're looking at, someone mentioned IBD, which is in my head right now, but a healthy GIT versus an IBD, what do those look like? Can you show that graphically to help people understand? And this might be one of my favorite memes. Maybe I'm a millennial, I guess, but the meme here that your infographic could really be the clarity for someone. If I'm searching through the literature trying to learn about metabolic syndrome, if you come across an infographic, sometimes you're like, yes, I get it. It all makes sense. So the meme here is that moment when you find the perfect avocado at the supermarket. So your infographic could be that avocado. You could be the clarity, the key finding. That could be your work. And so that just helped me, get a little bit of fire under me when I'm looking for my infographic creation. Okay, so some visual design principles. Again, we're happy to share the slides and you'll get a handout after, so we're going to just hop over this for now. But this was the infographic element I was mentioning before. So Abbott Nutrition Health has some amazing graphics about their work. And so we have an example of a non-diabetic and a diabetic function. So visually you can see they have their pink as glucose, and then green insulin, and then the state at the end. So really, really a clever way to show the difference between these two disease states. So for those of you who are working across the world, there's been some really interesting international research shared today, which I think is great. A map is something that most of us are familiar with. We've seen a picture of the world. So if you're showing disease statistics or if you're showing information knowledge across the world, putting down a map, you connect people to that, and then you can share your data in different ways. So in this case, they've shared their health map alerts by the size of the bubbles. So a really unique way to communicate this information quickly. So you create a familiar image, a clear legend, and then your data is represented in a visual way. And this one, if it's going to work, let's see. No. Okay, so this one, it's not about nutrition, but it's about home siding, which seems weird. But this is kind of what I see as next generation, and maybe it's already there and I'm already behind. But so what happens in this infographic is along the top, the dates change. So as it plays out, the dates move along. The siding changes, so they've used wood. So let's say wood is decreasing. The size goes from big to small. So you can think about, we're in the generation of 3D. You want people to interact with your data. I spoke with someone recently and she was saying, no, on our website, people can play with the data. They can say, what do autism rates look like in 2018 versus 1977? And the data moves for them. Really, really unique. And there's some platforms that will allow you to do this. So that's a cool thing for you to visualize moving forward. Step number 7, feedback. So extremely important to collect feedback. And so we just have briefly, Shannon mentioned this at the beginning, the difference between feedback and evaluation. So you want someone to work with you in the process that's going to provide feedback. You want to improve your work. You want safe, effective, clear feedback. If you're being evaluated, for example, in a competition, that's different. But the feedback you want to achieve throughout the process is going to really help you improve your work. And something I did want to mention briefly, so a lot of us have experienced this from, let's say, a professor marking an assignment, an advisor giving us feedback on something, grant reviews. You experience what I like to call, the acronym is called SARA, and you might have already felt this and you connect with this deeply. I know I do. As soon as I got feedback from my advisor on my manuscript, I would go through these stages. So the first stage is shock. I was like, no, I don't believe that. The next being anger. I was like, clearly they don't know what they're talking about. I can't believe they would write that about my work. The next being resistance, like, I could probably leave that one out, right? And the last one being acceptance, that, okay, I'm going to sleep on this. I'm going to read it tomorrow and see how I feel about that. So that can be feedback anywhere from a colleague giving you feedback on something, an idea that you're really passionate about can really hurt if the feedback is not what you expect. It can be from an advisor, it can be from a mentor, it can be as a professional when you're getting an annual review or you're sharing your work. So just acknowledge that you might be feeling these things and it's okay to process them as you receive them. So something that I found useful is to share, if you're asking a colleague or a collaborator for feedback, you might want to give them some help. Not everyone is able to provide feedback the way you need it, so giving them some help to know what you're looking for. Do you want feedback on the usefulness, legibility, design, or aesthetics? That can really help target the feedback and give you some really intentional next steps. And so this is an example here. So this, I wanted to show you, like in real life, how feedback has been applied to some of the work that I've done. So this example on the left, I think this was my 4th infographic. Looking back at this now, I would never have designed it this way. So it's funny, even now, I would change things. So my 4th infographic, I thought I really knew what I was doing. And then through several revisions with Shannon and I, the education committee, and the CNS group, the final product is on our right. So this was something that, again, no matter how good you think you are, no matter how clearly you've communicated, there's always room for improvement. So ask those stakeholders, ask for feedback. Your product is going to be improved. And to highlight a safe learning environment. So this was always done in a context of my self-improvement, the product betterness. It was done in a way that was really constructive and wasn't hurtful towards me or towards the group. Okay, so if at this point you're like, all right, fine, I get infographics, you've shared some examples, but why should I consider doing it? Think about it beyond the scope of your next conference, of your class project. These are skills that you can use in a job. People are looking for you to communicate information, so you can use this beyond, and you can put it on your resume as a skill that you can use. And this can be a sound bite of information. Maybe it's a tweet. You know how to compose an image and a tweet. Maybe it's a full infographic. So these are skills that are beyond the immediate use. And it gives you a way to creatively communicate science. This was an outlet for me I didn't know was possible. I loved science. I wanted to tell my mom and dad were so sick of hearing from me by the end of my PhD, but this was another way I could share information with the public. And just another note, creating infographics is time intensive, so just give yourself that space to do it in a meaningful way. Okay, so what we're going to do next is, for those of you who do have your device with you, we're going to just briefly introduce you to piktochart if you're not already familiar with it. So just to acknowledge, it is 2:53, but we have a little bit of time that we're going to make up for our washroom break at the start, so don't feel like you need to run away. So what we're going to do is sort of this process, I think, if you like this, you can refer to this when you go through your work. This is something that I would kind of print out and keep beside me to remember the steps that I would go through. So if you don't have a computer today, do not worry. We're going to send you a PDF. You can work for hours and hours after the conference tonight, all over your weekend, creating a beautiful infographic. So don't stress. But for those of you who have one today, or you want to sit beside someone, that's great. I'll show you the images on the screen, so you'll be able to follow along that way too. Some of you may have already created your free account, which is excellent. So those of you are probably already a step ahead. You've already logged into your software, which is great. So I'm going to ask our CNS volunteers and Flora maybe just to walk around. If anyone needs help getting started, we'll get you started. Put up your hand, we can come and see you. So the first step, going to piktochart.com, and just a disclaimer, there are many free infographic software tools out there. I do not work for piktochart. I just love piktochart. It's the first one I used, so that's why we're sharing it today, just as an example. Explore others that might work better for you. So once you sign up using Google, Facebook, your first name, email, you'll get an email, and that will direct you towards opening your account. So step number 1, going to the website. Step number 2, signing up for a free account, and then you'll get an email encouraging you to sign in. So you should get that confirmation email, and then they'll ask you a few questions, and you can probably get started. So if anyone wants to throw their hand up, if you want to do this with us right now, and you need help getting into the software. Okay, I see a few piktocharts in the audience, which is awesome. So what we're going to do today is create an infographic. There's tons of other things you can do. You can create a presentation. So if you click on infographic, there should be a black screen giving you 3 options. It says infographic, something else, presentation. Click on infographic. At the very top, a green button says create new. So we're going to create new. Something that you can consider is there's templates available, really beautiful templates that real graphic designers have designed. So take advantage of their layouts if it works for your intended purpose. Sometimes I've started from scratch because I already have the vision and I just need to get it on paper. But if you find a template that works, feel free to use that as well. And so what we'll do is I'll provide sort of an example of something we've been working on, but feel free to start inserting your own content. So if you're thinking, okay, I'm going to write, my infographic is on omega-3 fatty acids, use your data right away. Don't feel like you have to copy this example. You can get started right now. So one quick note, I know we've all had the frustrations where you're working in Excel or Word or piktochart and your data is gone because your computer shuts down or you didn't save your data and you somehow didn't auto-save it. So the save button I just wanted to point out right away so we make sure we get our data saved. It's on the top right-hand side. It's a green button, save. It's right beside preview, download, and share. So make sure you know where that is. Do not lose your work. It takes a lot of time, so make sure you find that. So one thing, just really, again, we're just going to show you how the software works so that you can really get into it yourself. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a panel, and there's lots of options there. So graphics, uploads, background, text. So if you look at the text option, you can click on one of the different title, subtitle, etc. So let's say we choose title. You can either click on it or drag and drop it onto your template. you can, once you get it onto your chart, you can customize it. So you don't have to keep the title size the same. Choose the size that works for, let's say you want to do microbiome. That's the word you're going to use, maybe. And you can customize the size once you get it on there. You can change the font. When you're thinking about fonts, I think that comes next. Yes, choose a font that works for what you're trying to communicate. So for this example, I love this picture. The top, it says tranquility in both, but the first actually feels tranquil, and the second, you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't match. So we suggest sans serif to be really the most user-friendly font, but there's a ton of different sans serif options, so you have some flexibility to be creative. And there's also options available, websites that will help you if you're like, I have no idea what font to choose. There's websites that will help you choose an appropriate font combination. Okay, so titles. So what you've done is on the left-hand side, you've clicked on the title. It should now be in your graphic, and you can change the title to whatever you want. So in the example today, we've said facts about fruit, because that's something that we're working on, but you can say whatever it is that you're working on. Starving for the competitive edge, for example. And so you can choose the font style. So in this case, we have Reluco or any kind of sans serif font, and then you can change the color. So you can change it to white or black depending on the background, and you'll see it's very similar to Word in this part. So you can click on the color paint bucket and choose the color title that you want. And so just a note here too, when you're going to be printing this out, it may look different than it does on your screen, so do a few testers. It's kind of like when you get your academic poster printed and you're watching it being printed and you're like, my screen looks a little different than it did on my computer. Print out a tester so you know what to expect. Oh. And a quick note about white and negative space. So this is something that was very new to me. I'm not a graphic designer, so white and negative space is important and intentional. So your most important points should have the most amount of white space around them. So your title and your main point should be really eye-catching, and the white space should circle those. And the second is creating intentional space. So you don't want to leave an island or leave all your white space on one side. Try and balance it between the different elements that you're including. And visual hierarchy is another one. So your most important points should also be the largest and the easiest for the readers to see. So some advice I got from a graphic designer was to take a step back from your graphic and see how the content comes back into focus when you've had a minute to look away from it. So those funny images you get as kids where you see a swan and then you see dots, and it's kind of like that, but it's a way for you to focus in on your most important content. So the next one, and my favorite option, is the graphics. So you can insert shapes, icons, etc. from the graphics tab. I encourage you to use the search bar. It is fantastic. You just have to be creative with what you're searching for. So let's say I want apple, I'll try apple. If apple doesn't come up, I'll try fruit, vegetable, snack, food. Just use different words and see what's going to come up. They all are tagged a little bit differently, so if you don't find it the first time, then you'll be able to find it in your next round probably. If it doesn't have something exactly that you want, you can be creative and create your own, or you could import from Google if it matches the overall look and feel of what you'll be doing. And just a note that anything that's black as an icon can be changed color. So if there is a circle that you want to put in, you can change that color. Anything that's already pre-colored, you can't change that. So if you have the little person icon that you put in, that's my favorite, the little guy who has a spoon, you can't change the person at all. So you have to just go with what they have if you're using all piktochart for the look and feel, but anything black shape, you can change the color of that shape. And so we've already talked about consistency, which is really great. So the thing that I really wanted to spend the next few minutes on, which I think is one of the coolest features of piktochart for sharing data, is the tools option. So if you, and again, the left-hand side, you'll see all those options, and if you click on tools, we're going to spend a minute talking about charts. So if everyone left-hand side, tools, charts. So I have some example data here. If you just want to see how it's going to work, you can type in this data here. If you already have some numbers in mind, you can add your own data. It's just to try things out today. So our example here, carbohydrates in grams, fiber, glucose, fructose, sucrose. You can put in whatever numbers you want. These are accurate for an apple, but if you, is that what we did in apple? Yeah. But if you want to do your own data, it's just to practice what it's going to look like. So once you've entered the data, you'll get into your charts, and on the left-hand side, actually I'll come back up here for this, you'll see all sorts of different chart options. So you have, at the top you have a bar chart, there's a pie chart, so you can change the format, which I think is awesome. You can choose the format that's going to be the best to communicate the data that you want to share. You can change the individual color settings, and if you're sitting there thinking, I've entered my data into 18 platforms already, I'm not doing this again, Excel will help you out. You can import directly. So if you already imported your data for your project, you can import the data directly, save yourself some time. Okay, so you can insert your chart when you're ready. Your chart's good. At the top right-hand side, you'll see Insert Chart. It'll plop it right into your canvas, so your data is now there. You can change it at any time using the pencil icon. And if you're going to update your chart, you can make changes to the colors, to the data as you go through. So what I think, what I found to be the best or the coolest, I wanted to do those cool graphics like Health Canada does. You have 3 people, and then you have 3 out of 5. How did they do that? So when I came across this, I think it was actually in a piktochart YouTube video, which they have excellent support online. This is how you can do that. So for example, we did carbohydrates in an apple, so it's showing us the proportion. So the proportion data is one of the most commonly communicated statistics, so this is how you do that. So on the in the graphs option, you have this dot, so the icon matrix. That's how you're going to create these proportioned statistics. So in our case here, we see that, for example, 19% of the carbohydrates in an apple are glucose, so that's represented now visually. And your data may show something else. So if you're looking at whatever you're looking at, the FODMAPs in the diet, how many people are following whatever type of diet, you can see that there. You can play around with the data till it makes sense for what you're looking for. And the best part is you can change the icons. So if you want a person icon, if you want an apple icon, if you want this molecule icon, you can change it up to match the data that you're trying to communicate. So that's what I think is really unique about this tool. So if you have any questions about this, again, it's just an example of what you can do, but I think for me, I was like, that's how you do the proportions. So that's what I found really useful. So again, you can change the individual color settings. Okay, and that's where you can customize the shape. You can show the entire icon library, or you can upload an image that's most relevant for you. And you can change the colors. And then the top icon at the very top, the gear, will allow you to update and edit and change your data. Okay, so again, this was a fairly lightning round, super quick intro into piktochart. So we want to give a few minutes for questions if people are stuck, but when you're ready, let's pretend you worked super fast and you have your draft ready. Sometimes what's helpful is to take a preview of it. So sometimes I get super zoomed in and you forget what it looks like. So if you take a preview, it will zoom you out and let you look at the whole thing all together. You can also download it. So the free software allows you to save it as a PNG file. If you have a paid software, so as a nonprofit organization or a student, it's a fairly reasonable rate if you're going to be using this consistently for your research project. You can save it as a high quality PDF, so it depends on your ultimate purpose. You can also do, it kind of is like a Prezi presentation, so each block of the infographic will show up as a presentation, so another way to consider communicating if that's an option for you. And so, ta-da, obviously you all now have a brilliant infographic in front of you, given that we've just zoomed through all of the infographic principles and quickly introduced you to piktochart. I'm being facetious. I know it takes a lot longer than this to create an infographic, but I really hope that you got at least a sense of getting started. We have created a full PDF manual of a how-to guide. We're going to be sharing that with you, so please use that as a resource. Piktochart also has a ton ton of good data online. They have lots of workshops and tutorials that will help you go through things. And so just a brief acknowledgements of my collaborators. So as I mentioned, Dr. Shannon Grant was key in my development of these infographic skills. My collaborators, or my colleagues at the Canadian Sugar Institute, reviewed this presentation and work with me meticulously to make sure that visual design is incorporated in these slides as well as in the infographics that we do. I also received a lot of feedback. I love feedback. It's so important for our work. So Jim, Joanne, Wilson, Julia, and Kate all interacted with me quite a lot in the development of this work, knowing that this isn't my field of expertise. It's just something I have done and now want to make sure I'm consistent with what everyone else is saying in the field. I have a lot of scientific references. Again, we base our work in science, so the research on infographics is new, which is exciting. So if this is something that you think, can I do research with this? You can. There's room for this. It's very new, so we're still trying to navigate what the gaps are and how to properly fill those in a theoretical way. And then there's tons of resources online. So our guide, our how-to guide, I think is excellent, totally biased, but there's a lot of other ways online that you can access help. Piktochart is great. There's a lot of websites that help you generate color palettes, font styles, font combinations. There's also an infographic course. So the PH spot for public health professionals, really targeted towards those individuals. She has an online course that you can take. So if you're thinking about infographics as part of your research program or your career, this could be another option for you to get even more exposure to this. So again, acknowledging that this was really a quick intro, I hope that all of you have taken something away from the workshop today. So I wanted to thank you all for your kind attention, and we'll have a few minutes for questions if anyone has anything. So thank you very much.